I am DM Zone. This is Gamers Oasis. Let's get into it. In this video, I'm going to talk about trying to sum up a massive chaotic mix of topics that you might know as supplement to Blackmoor. Now, first of all, this was designed around the 1974 Dungeons and Dragons that came out. It was the first one of this type of game. So a lot of the organizational skills and whatnot that would be seen in later polishes and versions of both this game and other games that came out around it were not there yet. I think that's important to say based upon how this book's going to roll out. This is also my 8th video on this specific book. I feel like I've covered it in pretty good detail. Now, there are videos you can go back and look. I'll talk about several of them as we're going through this video. There is so much more in this book that I've not yet covered, but this will still be a longer video for sure. Okay, so there are two classes that were introduced in this book, the monk and the assassin. These are sort of the opposite end of the spectrum from each other for the thief class, though technically the monk is considered part of the cleric subclass. So we'll get into how that actually works in a second. What I also kind of find odd is that the thief came out in Greyhawk, which was supposed to be at the same time, if not come out after Blackmoor, and it wasn't even truly designed. It was finished and probably refined by TSR. It was made by a person who lived in California, who wrote and talked to Gygax, and Gygax said, yeah, send it in, and then he included it. So it lets you know really how fast they were mobilizing things they liked and what they saw and that type of stuff when it came to the early versions of Dungeons and Dragons. The monk kind of works like a druid. Next week, I'm actually doing the druid video, so you can check that out when it comes out. That's part of Eldritch Wizardry, which is the 3rd supplement. And I'm doing these sort of in not really chronological order, but in numerical order, as you can kind of gather. There are a certain number of monks after 6th level. That means there are so many 7th, so many 8th, so on and so on. They have to fight to progress. This creates sort of a closed loop. If a monk that is 8th level dies to a dragon, there's no way to replace it. If he dies of old or she dies of old age, falls in the well, drowns, has a fishing accident, something. So I've always believed in a way to add more monks to the roster outside of dying in honorable dueled combat, potentially, or losing their level because of honored dueled combat, which is technically what should be happening, not necessarily a fight to the death. Though anything, I guess, could happen. And before I get roasted too hard, yes, I know, and I have already said once that this is a subclass of the cleric. However, color it weird, it has a lot of things that a thief would have. Matter of fact, it has everything but the pickpockets. And it only counts as a halfling, one of, if not the best, versions of a thief throughout the whole thing, and it has to be human. So yeah, that's not thief-like at all, guys, right? The only thing that is the same as a cleric in reality are the saves. It even has a cure light wounds, technically, I guess, and it can speak to plants and animals. It also has great avoidance to magic, having some sort of ESP resistance and telepathy resistance, which I talk a lot more about in the monk video. I'm not going to get into it here, but let's just say that it's pretty nice, and it's not the beginning or the end. It's sort of in the middle of what this thing can do, because it's also immune to hypnosis and suggestion, in even spell-like abilities or effects that are like those spells. It gets that at 8th level. It gets to delay the moment the monk wants to deliver a quivering palm, killing the target instantly for up to its level in days, which is kind of insane. Which means it could actually have more than one of these up at a time. And if that's not crazy enough, all the effects and abilities that a monk does are not considered magical. So dispel magic doesn't work. And they can actually outright anything that's considered to be a missile. That can be a ray or a certain type of attack or a bow or a crossbow, maybe a giant's boulder. So I think you're pushing it at that point. There are some level caps, like I said. There's the hard cap of like 14th, but there's also the hard part of leveling up through the ranks. I actually feel like that doesn't affect a tremendous amount of people. Probably 95% of the people playing the game won't get to the 14th level, if not more than that. But I don't think the character should stop there just because. Assassins are a lot more friendly to the referee, as they tend to be a tool or in the toolbox of a referee more than the monk probably would be. I mean, a monk can be color, it can be a flower, literally a lotus petal or something like that. But the assassin is like a bad guy, typically. It could be used to infiltrate and try to assassinate someone that the party's trying to treat as a ward or protect, this type of stuff. Maybe a party member is an assassin, they don't want to let the party know. Now, they also count as a thief, but they actually count as a thief 2 levels lower than what they are. And like monk, they're heavily restricted on their level. They also have some requirements for stats. I cover this both in the specific videos talking about monks and assassins. I'm not going to get into that specifically here. Let's just say that this is starting to be the introduction with the subclasses to have these stat requirements in the game, which did not exist prior. The great things assassins have in like real short order is they have disguise. They can learn other alignment languages to confuse what alignment maybe they are, or understand things they should not. All of these things are pretty detailed and specific in their own parts, so I won't go into it here, but I think it's also worth pointing out that it's a great tool in larger cities for referees to use, and will often be found in wandering encounters within these cities, even though they may not represent themselves as an assassin. There is a funny thing with the assassin using poisonous blades. Why that's more terrifying and causing ferocity in your opponent than other things, I don't know. And I leave that kind of to your interpretation of how that should be used. However, this book's not done there. No, it talks about giants. And I have a video talking about this too, both the metaphoric giant and the literal giants that are covered within this book. You see, there are giant size things that are like spiders, which is literally called a giant spider. This makes it a classification of a giant spider. And then there are giant size things like a Tyrannosaurus Rex, which is more of a metaphor because it's just a massive creature. The way I kind of describe it in the giant video is the reason why it's a giant, a true giant, but not actually a true giant, I'll get to that in a second, is because it adjusts the armor class. It gives it more hit points. Maybe it has a special ability or attack that the non-giant sized creature wouldn't have. Like you can run into a hunter spider that is giant size and it'd be terrifying and it could take you down. But if you saw a hunter spider in real life, while they're terrifying, some of them being up to 5 inches across, they don't really attack people. And if they were to bite you, it'd hurt and probably cause a problem, but it's probably not going to kill you unless you have a weakened system. Now, true giants, this is a thing that I talk about a little bit specific, and they were actually found in the 1974 rules. And this one, we're actually talking about things like hill giants, stone giants, frost giants, fire giants, and storm giants. These were called true giants, and it's kind of a hark back to the days of chainmail when they had true trolls and trolls, where ogres were considered to be trolls, but they weren't trolls, and trolls were actually true trolls, and they had like different rules, and one was on the fantasy table and the other one was not. Having these different classifications and not having them well defined causes more problems than one might think initially. For example, if you have a potion of giant control, does it affect it? A sword with giant slaying. Some items that invoke the name giant are not necessarily so clearly understood if you don't have these categories specific. And in the 1970 rules, they didn't have really the giant outside of the true giants I spoke about. In that one, they refer to giant creatures as large, and they have a whole section talking about large creatures. And when you find animals, they could be large. And over the years, there's been several other classifications that I like and have used. Some of my favorites are the dire, the fiendish, the celestial, and of course, giants. But giant is going to be used far more in games as it is for both high magic and low magic. You're more likely to find giant in a Conan novel as you are to find it in Middle-earth, but for sure, true giants would be in Middle-earth, and giant-sized creatures would be in Middle-earth. So I feel like there's some good classifications. And if you're not going to use giant, but you want to make it scary, I tend to like to use swarms. I talk about this a little bit in the giant video as well, and in several other videos that I use swarms. The difference between the two is giants tend to do more damage and have a higher AC, maybe with some extra hit points. And swarms tend to be a huge hit point bloat that have some sort of special ability that fits. Like maybe a swarm of insects blinds you while you're inside it and you can't see things while they're on you. And they engulf you in this, and you basically suffer neg4 to hit things. Where a swarm of spiders might have an attack that's considered poisonous, if that makes sense. Now, both giants and swarms continue underwater, and this was a huge focus in this book, and I found that a little bit odd, maybe surprising. I mean, I knew that Blackmoor was near water and had a marsh and everything like that, but it had such a heavy focus. It took me back a little bit when I first read over this and really paid attention to what was going on here. There's over a half dozen intelligent races that are predominantly, if not completely, aquatic. I don't mean reptilian like lizardmen. I mean aquatic like Shawagin and this type of stuff, merfolk, that type of stuff. Like truly, they live in the water. They don't come out of the water type of thing. There's over 30 creatures they introduced that were for the most part aquatic. There were a few amphibious type like giant toad and giant frogs and this type of stuff. But there was a lot more of a focus on what happens below the surface of the water than what I was expecting. And it's not surprising that there were new magic items. Well, maybe not necessarily new, but maybe they were reskinned magic items that were within this book. There was a lot of lore that was hinted at, and maybe in an expansion, if they would have come up with like a Blackmoor 2 or a follow-up to Blackmoor, they would have dove into that a lot more. What I really feel like this book did is it took a lot of what people knew, turned it on its ear, especially in the Temple of the Frog, and gave you permission to step outside of the norm and what people were expecting and to really take this into the stratosphere. And if that part didn't hit its mark, maybe this will. Let's talk about hit locations. Yeah, it's a thing. It's a major cluster of charts and very specific situations. Whether the target is a human or a snake matters a lot. Whether you are above, behind it, above it, below it, matters a lot. Once you know what chart you're using and what position you're attacking from and the type of creature you are attacking, then you need to find out whether you are attacking the head or the torso, because that's really the part that matters. Because you can take 3 points of damage, an average dice roll, 3.5 is average on a d6, to both your arms and both your legs for a total of like 12 points or 14 if you're doing the 3.5. And that'd be enough to kill you, but you're not going to cripple any one person with that hit. However, if you take 3 points of damage to the head, you're dead. You take 3 points of damage to the body, depending on what class you are and what level you are, you might be dead. So I don't know if that makes the argument clear, but essentially it's either meaningless or it's absolutely instant death, if that makes sense. I think where that really clears itself up is when you start to look at like the percent chance to hit certain locations. And if you were to really go into the numbers and look at, okay, I'm shorter than my target, where am I hitting? How long is it going to take for me to kill something by doing all of its hit points? Okay, it's taller than me, as in a giant, and then that giant swings its weapon down. How likely is it to hit me in the head or torso? Oh, it only has to do one hit there. Oh. And that's where it starts to come into the devastating effect. So it's either meaningless when you're fighting things your own size, or very disproportionately bad for the player always when you're fighting things that are bigger than you. And rarely are things smaller than you. And the things that are smaller than you, you don't care. If you attack a goblin in the arm or the head, you're probably going to kill the goblin. Doesn't matter. But if the giant attacks you in the head or the arm, it matters. Because you could maybe survive the attack at a certain level. Like let's say 10th level. You could probably survive that attack. Even at 10th level, you're probably not surviving attack to the head from a giant. And that's a problem. In the to hit location video, I break it down how I would do it. I change the numbers around a little bit. I incorporate rules for helms, these type of things. I think that there's a lot of great things you can find in there that would be good. There's also an element of this, and I talk about this in the hit location 2 video, talking about height versus weapon length. This is leaning towards AD&D First Edition a lot, talking about weapon speed and this type of stuff, and all the things they get into depth with that. I think that's great. I think it's a little bit simulator-ish, and if that's the type of game you like to play, I think that's cool. It's not my type of game, but that's okay. Not that AD&D is not my type of game. Just being a simulator is not necessarily my type of game. It does even the playing field a little bit for fighting things like giants. It makes it so that you're not just attacking the lower half of the legs, and you actually have a chance to stab it in parts that are going to be damaging. In the hit location video, I actually talk about the gizzards, which is a construct that was made in Deadlands, and I would think it'd be good to incorporate something like that into a D&D like hit location. And while I think all this is great and reasonable and logical, I think that there is a far faster and smoother way to handle it that doesn't make it necessarily feel like it is a simulator. As I've said, that's not necessarily my thing. I like streamlined rules, and I like details. I just don't like the bulk of like an Iron Crown Enterprises, or ICE, as it was called back in the 80s. Chartmaster, as it's sometimes called, but I think that's a little bit mocking of it. I feel like when you get close to a simulator, it gets a little too complicated and slows down the game, and that's a death nail for most games. I do not think they were wrong for doing it, but I think how they had it was incorrect, if that makes sense. Like, I love the concept of it in a game. I don't necessarily want it as it is. In the last video I did in Blackmoor, the supplement, I talk about the Temple of the Frog. This is a great video for anyone wanting to learn how the campaigns were built. In the actual play I referenced, there is a little bit that the players missed, maybe that old school charm, because the camera probably affected it. I don't want to talk badly about what they did. They put out something that was good. They tried to do something that was very good, and I have not done that yet. I've thought a lot about it, but I haven't done it. But here's sort of what I saw that was maybe a little bit of a miss. I think they missed some of the epic moments that, in retrospect, looking back, when they were going back over the module, the campaign in their head, they would have laugh out loud moments about how they didn't realize that at the moment, but then they look back and they're like, oh my God, that was genius. And for the viewer following along, I think they'd be like, oh, that was so cool. Here's what I'm talking about. There was too much backstory for a single one shot. I don't feel like this is a great adventure module. As I said in my video, talk about the Temple of the Frog, and I certainly don't feel like it works out well to be a one-shot. However, if you did one-shots that were adjacent to it, like maybe a village outside of Castle Blackmoor, and you got to meet some of the guards and some of the people, and you started to learn how these people talk and what they find important and what they find relevant and what terms they understand and don't understand. And then you did something for Castle Blackmoor, and you got to meet some of the guards and maybe this heroic figure that was there at the time that became part of the fixture for what they chose to do in Temple of the Frog, which I think was great. Great story. Then all the quips, the jokes, the quoting of movies that happened would have landed completely different. I think they took them as fourth wall breaks, and that this was just him being funny, trying to spice up and liven up the module, when that wasn't their purpose. What the purpose of that was, in my opinion, was to show how alien and foreign this was. I mean, at one point in time, he said the guy is wearing a suit of armor that doesn't look like it's made of metal, and he spells out the word or says the name NASA. Essentially, the Stefan the Rock is an alien from Earth to Blackmoor, the planet where Blackmoor's at. And all the movie quotes was him essentially trying to assimilate people into the Earthlings lifestyle. And if they don't succeed, they get sacrificed. And if they succeed, then they become part of his rank and file, like the quartermaster. And I think that people understanding that would have happened in levels and would have been good. But because people saw it as a fourth wall break, it didn't land right. And that's what I'm talking about. This module has such depth. This campaign setting really has such depth that you could have done like a quest hub of adventures around here and made this into something truly epic and awesome. And then when they came back with movie quotes, it wouldn't be stuff that they know in their own life. They'd be restating movie quotes that they heard other people use, which then would be maybe them keeping track of movie quotes they hear these conditioned people saying for funny effect, or for impact when they're trying to represent them as being disassociated because they are conditioned, and using that as an excuse for why they don't know or acting the way they're supposed to be acting. Anyways, 10 out of 10, great module. Would love to see it done in that manner. I think that would be really, really good. It sold me on the idea of wanting to do it someday. I think I just got to get the right group, and I got to do that. It's the third part. It's the fifth part. And I have that campaign around it type of thing before I actually gets to that adventure. And I'm not going to get into that too much and spoil it, because there's a lot of really cool stuff in there. One of the things I will say about the Dungeon Master is I think he got it. I think he lost control a little bit of it, probably because it's being video recorded and he didn't want to feel like he was stepping on anyone's toes or smashing people's agency and this type of stuff. And it could be a hard thing, but he hit it out of the park when he asked them before the game started to list some movie quotes. Now, I think if we would have had this as a third one shot and he would have taken just the classic stand-ins, I'll be back, or get to the chopper, that type of thing, or the Die Hard ones, or, like yippee-ki-yay, and that type of stuff. And I'm not doing the accents on these because it'd be too much for me right now. But anyways, if he would have done that, some of these timeless movie quotes would have been on point. And you could go through a genre, like I said, from Die Hard to Frozen to Wizard of Oz, all these would have hit and they would have landed just fine. And then you could have sprinkled in some of the ones that the players talked about, but not like last week or the beginning of this week or before the session, but like 3 months ago. And I think that would have landed and hit differently than what it did. I think the main difference is it'd be a change in perspective from this is what the player is thinking the character should say versus this is what the character is viewing and is trying to figure out why that character said something out of character, if that makes sense. By putting it more in that perspective, I think it would have landed a lot differently and it would have a very different setup and a much bigger and better reveal. Again, I am not knocking what they did. I think they did an awesome job. They inspired me to want to do this myself. And maybe I will consider doing this type of thing in the future. What I will say is that this book, this module, this campaign setting that was in there is extremely sci-fi concept. If you're not wanting to transition into any sort of sci-fi campaign, you might want to skip this one or change how it was. If you are wanting to take this into space, like with a Spelljammer, this feels like a very Jack Vancian type of story. If you've ever read the book Planet of Adventure, where the aliens fight and the natives fight both against each other and against a force that is oppressive, I think this would be a great forte into that, shall we say. So what is my overall opinion of this book? Well, I think it's a must. I mean, you can play with that, but why? I would ignore a few things. I would ignore the monk class as it is wrote. I would ignore the hit locations, the height and weapon, and a few other things like that. I mean, they're fine, but they're way too simulator, and they need a lot of reworking to be functional in my game. The monk is quite literally the best at everything and multiple things at the same time. And I think the power scale of that is not good. And I don't care that it has really high stat requirements. I don't want it in my game. I don't want NPCs like that in my game. I want a creature with quivering palm in my game. I don't want an original Dungeons & Dragons monk in my game, if that makes sense. I like the assassin and giant creatures and the classification stuff like that. I love the underwater focus. I wish there was more of the Temple of the Frog and maybe it had its own book and about 20 pages added. I think this is a great gateway campaign into Spelljammer, as I said already. Though Spelljammer didn't come out for many years after this. I mean, if you could imagine what would happen if you took Stefan the Rock out. If you got his battle armor, his sword, his shield, his medical kit, his space pod, which was some sort of communication array or whatever. What happens if he went into space and found like the satellite or whatever he was communicating with? What do you do from there other than create a Spelljammer thing? I mean, there's a whole world of people that Stefan the Rock comes from. He's reporting back to people. He's there to stop the incursion of other either aliens or this planet from, I guess, reaching space. So his people don't have to deal with them. He's not the greatest of them. There's probably thousands of him there. He's probably just in the top 10, 20%. He's like a, special forces dude for like an army, if that makes sense, a commando. But he's not Rambo. He's not the best. He's just good. Can you imagine what would happen if the party were to be silly and be like, Alexa, take me home, and see what happens? Who knows what would happen? Actually, to be honest, I think the sci-fi gear, even from Supplement 2, not counting the stuff in DA2, the Temple of the Frog, which was a module wrote in 1986 by Dave Arneson, the same author for Blackmoor, when he came back to TSR briefly, is not completely out of place in any D&D game. I just would tone it back and make it more realistic for the campaign setting, and a less fantastic. Just because it's from a different planet doesn't necessarily make it better. When John Carter went to Mars, he was different and he had some fantastic abilities and may have been incredible, but there was incredible things there too, and he didn't just overwhelm and outdo everything, if that makes sense. So yes, if you're wanting to build a campaign world and you're wanting to use the older rules, I think this is a great book. I think Temple of the Frog is a great additive to your game. I think that having one of those on your map is awesome and definitely a live world to be built out from there. So I would say, while this has a completely different focus than Greyhawk, which focused more on the character and some of the other classes that go with it, like the Paladin, I feel like there are really important and good things here. And if you spend a little more time on this book, you could make this into something that you would really, truly enjoy. Anyways, guys, did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? Let me know down in the comments what you think. What I do or forget to talk about in this one. Maybe I need to make a follow-up video on this. Thank you. Have a great day and keep rolling those dice. Bye.